welcome for Martin. I have a dream. For some in this room, Kennedy's warm smile and handshake were bittersweet. Returning to the Willard Hotel, where less than 24 hours earlier, voices were raised and fingers were pointed, the wise men gathered there once again, this time to celebrate and to reflect upon the day that was. Leader, you swept today, Reverend Abernathy told Martin. You preached today, John Lewis added. You were smoking. Clarence Jones had told Martin moments after the speech. The words were so hot, they were just burning off the page. They all knew more battles lay ahead. Angry late-night meetings in hotel lobbies, frantic phone calls, tears and blood to be shed, fighting every inch to cross a bridge to make Martin's dream come true. And those battles continued to be fought. But that night brought optimism and laughter, for they all agreed. Martin stepped up to the lectern and stepped down on the other side of history. Well, thank you guys for listening to A Place to Land. It was so interesting to learn about all of the different people who inspired Martin Luther King Jr., those who helped him, different religious figures, political figures, friends and family, even musical figures, and those who we wouldn't really expect. As always, he listened to God as well to help him decide what he was going to do, what he was going to say, and the type of impact that he wanted to make on that day and to our nation as a whole. Well, to America's nation, but obviously Canada was very affected by that too. So I hope you guys enjoyed A Place to Land. If you take a look, there's a few little things that we will discuss on its own in the back, just some other voices that were important on that day, and a note about the hotel advisors that he spoke with to write the speech. So take a look at that, and if you don't, then I hope you have a great Martin Luther King Day, and let the knowledge be power to you. Hi there, and we're back with No Place to Land. I just wanted to go over some of the influential figures that helped Martin Luther King Jr. write his speech, who influenced the speech, or who was speaking at the March on Washington, just to give us a little bit more information about those around him. The Willard Hotel advisors. So there was quite a few advisors that Martin Luther King Jr. had when he was writing the speech on that evening before the March on Washington. One of the first was Reverend Ralph Abernathy. We do remember he had some lines in the story that we were reading. He was a Baptist minister, and he also helped organize the Montgomery bus boycott, which is something we have discussed. He co-founded the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. He's also considered a major civil rights figure, serving as close advisor to Dr. King. He was also Martin's closest friend. After Dr. King's assassination, Abernathy became the president of the SCLC. Another advisor of his on that day was Cleveland Robinson. He was an important American labor organizer and key civil rights activist. He was the chairman of the administrative committee for the March on Washington. He was based in New York City. He worked very hard to get minority representation in various labor unions. And he also helped organize Nelson Mandela's first visit to New York in 1990. Bayard Rustin was in charge of the mensch job of organizing the march. He was a student of Mahatma Gandhi's teachings. He helped mold Martin Luther King Jr. into a worldwide icon of peace and nonviolence. Despite these achievements, Rustin was beaten, imprisoned, and dismissed from important positions of leadership because he lived as an openly gay man in an era of homophobia. So poor Mr. Rustin was dealing with hate on multiple fronts in a time where we were trying to make big changes. All right, we also have Reverend Walter Fauntroy. He was the director of the Washington Bureau of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, so the Washington area of that. He just served as the DC coordinator of the historic March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. He was a coordinator for the Selma to Montgomery March for voting rights. And he was also appointed vice chairman of the White House Conference on Civil Rights. He became the vice chairman of the DC City Council in 1967. So he had quite a foothold in politics. Wyatt T. Walker was an African-American pastor, national civil rights leader, theologian, and cultural historian. Dr. Walker became one of the first board members of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in 1958. The same year, he helped found a chapter of the Congress of Racial Equality. Between 1960 and 1964, Dr. Walker served as executive director of the SCLC, helping to bring the organization into prominence, so to be more known. The last few were a personal counsel, advisor, draft speechwriter, and close friend of Dr. King, Clarence B. Jones, Andrew Young, who we know now helped write Dr. King's speech in his suite during that evening on August 27th, before the March on Washington. So he got the closest peek to what the speech would have been, or the full speech. And Professor Lawrence Reddick, he was a historian, author, and Harvard professor interested in racist depictions of African Americans in popular culture. While teaching at Alabama State College in Montgomery at the height of the bus boycott, he met Dr. King. He subsequently traveled with King to India in 1959 to deepen their understanding of Gandhian principles of nonviolent social change. Nonviolent social change. So as we can imagine, and that's something that we discuss a lot with the civil rights movement, is nonviolent change. And Martin Luther King Jr. was obviously a huge promoter of nonviolent change. He believed that words mean more, and nonviolent actions obviously as well mean more than hurting somebody to get your point across. So I hope that that gave you a little bit of insight into the people who were helping him write that speech. Again, they were called the Willard Hotel Advisors. Some other voices that we did hear about: Langston Hughes. He was an American poet, social activist, novelist, playwright, and columnist. He was an important literary figure in the 1920s, a period known as the Harlem Renaissance. His writing portrayed the lives of working-class blacks in America. Hughes' poetry is thought to have greatly influenced Dr. King. Scholars note the similarities between Hughes' I Dream a World poem and King's I Have a Dream speech. So Langston Hughes is somebody that you can look to yourselves for some inspiration for writing, poetry, and those things. Mahalia Jackson was quoted by Clarence Jones and Ted Kennedy as having shouted to King, "Tell them about the dream," which is what got him going on speaking about what his dream for America looked like and what the end of segregation would mean for him. Jackson is considered one of the greatest musical figures in U.S. history. Closely associated for the last decade with the civil rights movement, Miss Jackson sang 2 songs at the March on Washington. She also sang at Dr. King's funeral in 1968. Stanley Levinson was another voice that we heard from. He was an attorney in New York and a lifelong activist in progressive causes. He was a close friend and advisor to Dr. King as well. He helped him write speeches, raise funds, and organize events. He was a vitally important advisor whose contributions apparently have gone largely unnoticed, but there are some reasons for that, just as Bayard Rustin had suffered because of his homosexuality. Stanley Levinson was a part of the Communist Party, and during that time the communists were being prosecuted in the United States as well. So there's a lot of things going on there. If you are interested in research, there is a lot more information of those who spoke at the March on Washington and other people who were very involved in the civil rights movement. So I would suggest, as a challenge to you for Martin Luther King Day, to look into those sources, find out what made the civil rights movement happen. How did Martin Luther King's words and actions impact us then? How do they impact us now? And what would you have done maybe in those situations? What would your speech have been to try and prove that segregation needed to end for the betterment of all of America? Or even in Canada, as we did have some issues with racial segregation as well. Thanks for listening, guys. I look forward to see you later.